My name is Marcus, and I am 29 years old. For 3 years, I thought I had found the perfect apartment. My landlord Richard seemed like a decent guy, and I was a reliable tenant who never missed a payment. We had built what I believed was a respectful landlord-tenant relationship based on fairness and mutual understanding. I was wrong about the fairness part, but my determination to fight back turned out to be more powerful than I ever imagined. What happened next would expose a criminal enterprise that had been exploiting tenants for years, and it all started with one illegal rent increase during the worst pandemic in a century. In March 2020, I was working as a bartender at 2 downtown restaurants in Portland, Oregon. My one-bedroom apartment in the Alberta Arts District was not luxurious, but at $1,200 a month, it was all I could afford. The building was old, built in 1952, but it had character. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a view of the mountains on clear days. I loved my routine. Wake up at 10 a.m., hit the gym, grab coffee from the shop downstairs, then head to work. I was saving money, had great relationships with my neighbors, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt stable. I even had a girlfriend, Jessica, who was talking about moving in together. Then COVID-19 hit like a meteor. Within 1 week, both restaurants closed indefinitely. My income went from $3,500 a month to zero. Jessica broke up with me over FaceTime saying she needed space to figure things out. My savings account, which I thought was substantial at $4,000, suddenly looked pathetically small. But I told myself it would be temporary. The government was talking about stimulus checks. Unemployment benefits were being expanded. I could weather this storm. I had to. That optimism lasted exactly 47 days. On May 1, 2020, I found a certified letter taped to my door. My hands were shaking as I opened it, but nothing could have prepared me for what I read. Notice of rent increase effective July 1, 2020. Your monthly rent will increase from $1,200 to $1,800. This 50% increase reflects current market conditions and necessary building improvements. Failure to pay the new amount will result in eviction proceedings, 50%, during a pandemic, when millions of people were unemployed. I read that letter 5 times before the words sank in. Then I started laughing, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming or crying, and I had already done enough of both in the past month. $1,800 a month. I could not even afford my current rent without unemployment benefits, which were taking forever to process. This was not just unreasonable, it felt deliberately cruel. I immediately called Richard, my landlord. His responses burned into my memory. Look, Marcus, I know times are tough, but I have got expenses too. Property taxes went up, and I need to bring all my units to market rate. If you cannot afford it, there are plenty of people who can. Richard, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There is a pandemic. People are dying. The whole city is shut down. How is this legal? It is perfectly legal. Check your lease. That night I did check my lease. And then I checked Oregon state law. And then I discovered something that made my blood boil. Rent increases over 7% annually were illegal in Oregon. And during the state of emergency, there was a moratorium on most rent increases entirely. Richard was not just being greedy, he was breaking the law. But here is what really hurt. When I confronted him with this information, he just shrugged and said, "So sue me. Good luck finding a lawyer you can afford." That is when I realized this was not just about money. This was about power. Richard thought I was powerless, that I would just roll over and accept whatever he dished out. He thought wrong. I may have been broke, but I was not stupid, and I definitely was not going down without a fight. The first thing I did was research. I spent hours online learning about tenant rights, rent control laws, and housing violations. I discovered that Oregon had some of the strongest tenant protection laws in the country, but they were only effective if people knew about them and were willing to enforce them. Then I did something that would change everything. I started talking to my neighbors. Mrs. Chenzintabi had received the same illegal rent increase. So had the young family in 1A. In fact, every single tenant in the building had gotten hit with increases ranging from 40 to 60%. But here's the kicker. Richard had told each of us that we were the only ones getting increased rent, and that it was because of our individual circumstances. We had been isolated and lied to. Classic predator behavior. But as I dug deeper into my neighbors' stories, I started noticing other things. Mrs. Chen's mentioned that her heater had not worked all winter, but Richard kept promising to fix it next week. The family in 1A had been dealing with a leaky ceiling for 8 months. My own apartment had electrical outlets that sparked occasionally, but I had been afraid to complain because I needed a good reference when I moved out. These were not just maintenance issues, they were building code violations. That is when I had my light bulb moment. If Richard was breaking the law with rent increases, what other laws was he breaking? And more importantly, could I use those violations as leverage? I decided to document everything. I bought a cheap camera and started taking photos. Exposed wiring in the basement, mold in the laundry room, fire exits that were blocked with storage, a broken smoke detector in the hallway that had been beeping for 3 months. But I needed professional help. That is when I discovered something beautiful. The Portland Tenants Union offered free legal consultations. I made an appointment for the very next day. Walking into the Portland Tenants Union office was like finding an oasis in the desert. The lawyer, Maria Santos, was everything Richard was not: professional, knowledgeable, and genuinely concerned about tenant welfare. After reviewing my documentation, Maria looked up with a smile that made my heart race with hope. "Marcus," she said, "you have stumbled onto something big. What Richard is doing is not just illegal, it is systematically criminal. These are not isolated violations. This is a pattern of exploitation that could result in serious penalties." She explained that under Oregon law, landlords who violate habitability standards could be forced to pay triple damages to tenants, but more importantly, tenants could withhold rent until violations were fixed, and illegal rent increases could be completely reversed. But then Maria told me something that changed my entire approach. "Marcus, I think you should consider organizing all your neighbors. A single tenant complaint is one thing, but a coordinated action from an entire building, that is a landlord's worst nightmare." Over the next 2 weeks, I became a different person. Gone was the passive bartender who just wanted to keep his head down. I was now a tenant organizer, armed with legal knowledge and a righteous anger that surprised even me. I held secret meetings in my apartment. Mrs. Chen's brought homemade dumplings. The family in 1A, Jose and Maria Rodriguez, shared their story of being threatened with deportation when they complained about their leaky ceiling, even though they were both American citizens. But the most shocking revelation came from Mr. Thompson in 3C, who had lived in the building for 15 years. He told us that Richard had been pulling these same schemes for years, targeting tenants who seemed vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. International students, elderly people on fixed incomes, single parents, anyone Richard thought would not know their rights. We were not his first victims, but we were going to be his last. Together, we documented over 40 serious housing code violations: lack of proper ventilation, inadequate heating, electrical hazards, plumbing issues that had created water damage, and even evidence that Richard had been entering apartments without proper notice. But I saved the best discovery for last. While researching property records, I found out that Richard had been receiving federal tax credits for maintaining affordable housing, while simultaneously trying to price out all his tenants with illegal rent increases. He was literally stealing from taxpayers while exploiting renters. This was not just a landlord-tenant dispute anymore. This was fraud. Armed with our evidence, and Maria Santos by our side, we requested a formal meeting with Richard. His response was predictable. He agreed to meet, but only if we came to his office one at a time. He was still trying to divide and conquer us. We had a better idea. On July 15, 2020, exactly 2 weeks before our illegal rent increases were supposed to take effect, all 8 tenant households, plus Maria Santos, plus a representative from the City Housing Authority, plus a local news reporter I had contacted, showed up at Richard's office simultaneously. The look on his face when we all walked in together was priceless. Pure panic, mixed with rage. He immediately started yelling about trespassing and calling the police. But Maria calmly informed him that we had scheduled this meeting, and everything we were doing was perfectly legal. Then we presented our case. Maria methodically went through each housing code violation, each illegal rent increase, and each fraudulent claim Richard had made to federal agencies. The Housing Authority representative took notes. The reporter recorded everything, but I wanted to speak for myself. I looked Richard directly in the eyes and said, "You thought we were powerless. You thought we would just disappear quietly when you priced us out during a pandemic? You thought you could break the law because we were too poor, too scared, or too ignorant to fight back. You were wrong about all of it." Richard's response was exactly what I expected: threats, bluster, and denial. He claimed the violations were minor, that the rent increases were justified, and that we were just trying to live for free. Then Maria delivered the knockout punch. "Richard, we are not asking you to fix these problems. We are informing you that you will fix them. Under Oregon Revised Statute 90.368, we are collectively withholding all rent payments until these habitability issues are resolved. Furthermore, we are filing a complaint with the State Attorney General regarding your fraudulent claims for federal housing credits." The reporter asked Richard for comment. His response, which would be broadcast on the evening news, was, "No comment. This meeting is over." But the meeting was just beginning. What happened next exceeded my wildest dreams. The news story about our tenant organizing efforts went viral locally. Other tenants from Richard's properties, he owned 6 buildings across Portland, started coming forward with similar stories. The State Attorney General opened a formal investigation into his business practices. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when Richard called me personally. His voice was different this time. Gone was the arrogant dismissiveness. He sounded tired, maybe even a little scared. "Marcus," he said, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out." I let him talk. He offered to reduce the rent increase to 15%, then 10%. Then he offered to keep our rent the same if we would drop our complaint. Finally I spoke. "Richard, I am going to make you a counteroffer. You are going to roll back everyone's rent to what it was before your illegal increases. You are going to fix every single code violation in this building within 60 days. You are going to pay each tenant $500 in compensation for the stress and illegal actions you took, and you are going to do all of this while under the supervision of the housing authority. There was a long silence. Then, and if I do not agree, then you can explain to a judge why you think it is legal to defraud both tenants and taxpayers during a global pandemic. He agreed to everything. By September 2020, our building was completely renovated. New heating systems, updated electrical work, fresh paint, and repairs to everything that had been neglected for years. Every tenant received their compensation check, and most importantly, Richard sold the building to a non-profit housing organization that actually cares about tenant welfare. But the real victory was bigger than money or repairs. We had proven that ordinary people, when they work together and refuse to be intimidated, can defeat even the most ruthless exploitation. Mrs. Chen's, who had been so afraid to speak up before, became a volunteer with the Portland Tenants Union. Jose and Maria Rodriguez used their experience to help other immigrant families know their rights. Mr. Thompson, after 15 years of accepting whatever scraps Richard threw at him, became one of the most effective tenant advocates I have ever seen. As for me, I never went back to bartending. I used my unemployment time to get certified as a tenant rights counselor. Today, I help other renters fight back against illegal rent increases, unsafe living conditions, and landlord intimidation. Because here is what I learned. The system only works when people are willing to make it work. Richard was counting on our silence, our fear, and our isolation. When we refused to give him those things, his entire scheme collapsed. If you are facing similar problems with your landlord, illegal rent increases, unsafe conditions, or any form of housing discrimination, know that you are not powerless. Document everything. Talk to your neighbors. Contact your local tenant union or legal aid organization. And remember that landlords like Richard only win when good people do nothing. The rent increase that was supposed to destroy my life ended up being the catalyst. That taught me how powerful we can be when we stand together and fight for what is right. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you have more power than you think.